Chapter 19. There's no smoke without fire. Well, they were both only moments behind her. By the time Sam and Corporal Timmins raced through the farmhouse entrance, Lily had disappeared from view. Already, thick arms of smoke were surging down the house's staircase, reaching for them like the swirling limbs of a kraken. Fingers of acrid mist reached down Sam's throat, pulling coughs and wheezes from his lungs. Beside him, the corporal's hacks and splutters confirmed that he was under a similar attack. The soldier pulled his combat sweater over his mouth and nose in an attempt to repel the fire's offence. "Which way, Sam?" They hadn't moved. Yet already Sam was feeling disorientated. Above their heads, waves of thick black soot and smoke swirled and billowed like storm clouds. Through eyes that were already watering, Sam watched in horror as those swirls began to crawl down the walls and windows. They devoured everything, swallowing paintings, coat hooks and a hat rack, and even the day's sunlight. "I can't see," Sam wheezed as the darkness began to cocoon him. He slashed his hands through the smoke, desperately trying to cut a pathway forward. "We need to find the stairs." "Lily!" the soldier called. "Lily, come back! It's too dangerous!" When only silence responded, the soldier reached out to grab Sam and push him back to the door. "Get out, Sam. I'll find her." Sam squirmed free of Corporal Timmins' grip, coughing up another lungful of soot and smoke. "No chance. The evidence is up there, and I know the way. If we don't get that, all this has been a waste of time. It's not worth dying for, Sam." "Maybe not," Sam said, beating the smoke back with his hands. "But Lily is. I'm not leaving without her." Sam would never know whether it was simply coincidence or the result of his determined efforts that caused the plumes of smoke to retreat exactly that moment. As though the fire itself were inhaling, the twisting billows shrank and briefly parted, giving Sam a glimpse through the hallway towards the staircase. He threw himself forward, surging through the darkness like a desperate jungle explorer in search of lost treasure. "This way," he told the corporal. "She'll be up here." Together they battled up the staircase. Daylight from second-story windows alarmed spears of brightness through the smoke, helping to light their way. But there was still no sight or sound of Lily. At the top of the first flight of stairs, Corporal Timmins dragged Sam to the floor. "We have to keep beneath the smoke," he told him. Soot had already painted patches across his face like coal miners' finger marks. "There's still clean oxygen down here." Sam couldn't help wondering if Lily had realised the same thing. He desperately hoped so. "How much further?" the soldier asked. "Another flight," Sam replied, desperately trying to overcome his fears. He was preparing to resume his climb when from somewhere above them a scream raced down the stairs. "Lily!" gasped Sam. "She's hurt!" Corporal Timmins placed a calming hand on Sam's shoulder. "At least she's alive. We need to find her." Both crawled up the stairs as fast as their suffering muscles could manage and, somehow, found themselves on the next landing. There, through the smoke, they were faced with more doors than they could possibly search in the time that was left before the fire devoured the whole house. Resolute, Sam began to crawl, but the soldier's grip on his arm was too strong. "Wait, we need to know exactly where she is," he told Sam, with a grave edge to his voice. "Lily!" Sam yelled, as panicked tears dried instantly on his face, leaving dry, salty streaks under his eyes. "Lils, we're coming! Where are you? We need to hear your voice!" At first, there was no reply, not even a scream. In fact, as the smoke closed in on them again, Sam was beginning to fear the worst, until a weak but familiar sound reached out from close by. "Was that an owl?" Corporal Timmins choked out, as a second, weak hoot followed the first. Sam grinned as more tears were stolen from his cheeks, then hooted back. "It's not an owl. That's Lily." He was already crawling forwards, his resolve renewed. They barely lifted their heads off the bare wooden floor as they followed Lily's hoots. Sam could feel his chest tightening and his own hoots weakening. Lily's sound were losing strength too. They were all running out of time. Sam and Corporal Timmins could no longer see the shapes made by the doorways and walls of the house. Using their fingers and palms to feel their way through the darkness, they frisked the walls and floor until they encountered a doorway. The first room that they checked was empty, as was the second. By the time their hand told them that they had found a third room, Sam was fighting to stay awake. His chest burned as though fire was raging inside each lung, and what air they did find to breathe seemed to burn his lips and tongue. Sam knew that this would be the last room they had checked. "This way," Corporal Timmins urged. "She has to be in here." Sam's hoots sounded more like gargles now, but he persisted anyway, fighting through the smoke in a desperate attempt to hear his cousin's reply. Ash and fumes had replaced the oxygen, and Sam could no longer battle the effects. His limbs felt heavier than lead, and his head seemed welded to the floor. As his eyes closed, he gave one final gargle. Lily's own last hoot fell on deaf ears. Chapter 20. Traitors, Secrets, and Sausages. Hospitals can be very boring places. Aside from the hustle and panic of an emergency situation, things happen very slowly, very quietly too. Sam had never been a patient in hospital before. He'd always imagined that those who did find themselves tucked beneath the starched white sheets of a hospital bed would quickly be driven half mad by a cocktail of boredom and frustration. Now, as a temporary resident of one of the hospital's embracing beds, he welcomed the peace and solitude. He gave his bruised body and strained mind the time and space to recover. It had been almost 48 hours since the fire at the Scales' farm. Sam barely remembered anything from the first 24 hours. They had passed him by in a blur of busy nurses, anxious doctors, and what felt like an interrogation of worried eyes. He slipped in and out of the sleep. Whenever he had managed to drift off again, he had been dragged awake by a searing pain in his throat and chest which made him wonder if he had been eating glass and nails. He had heard the sound of voices by his bedside, but his exhausted brain couldn't decipher their meaning, let alone form words of his own. This time, though, it wasn't the pain in his throat or chest that dragged him from his drugged slumber. It was a rumbling boom of explosions. They were distant, but Sam would recognise that sound anywhere. Sam's eyes snapped open as more explosions disturbed the hospital's tranquility. Although the bright glow of daylight made his eyes momentarily object, after a few anxious blinks, his gaze settled upon the concerned face of a young nurse. Her crisp white apron looked as though it might have been made from one of the hospital's bedsheets. "Am I back in London?" Sam winced. Every word hurt his damaged throat. "Of course not," the nurse replied. "You're in Scarborough? What makes you think you're in London?" "Those explosions," Sam said. "It's exactly the same sound Jerry bombs made back home." The nurse fired a concerned glance over her shoulder as the windows rattled again. "We'll be right. Even Jerry isn't artless enough to target hospitals, though one of those Air Force soldiers told us they're aiming for the primary school at Farley." "The school?" Sam gasped and made himself cough. "They're dropping bombs on the school." The nurse nodded slowly. "And from what we've heard, they haven't missed." The news struck Sam like a blow. Tears of rage and frustration spilled onto his cheeks as a realization struck that his and his friends' efforts had all been for nothing. They'd failed. The Germans had still managed to bomb the school. Sam didn't remember falling asleep. Yet, when he next opened his eyes, he realized that the sound of explosions had stopped. He could hear gentle movements around him as the nurses tiptoed between their patients. When he opened his eyes and glanced across at the large clock which perched above the ward's entrance doors, he saw that several hours had passed since the bombing raid. Life in the hospital was returning to normal. "Would you like something to eat?" one of the nurses asked him. The tone was gentle and encouraging. "The energy will help your recovery." Although his rumbling stomach answered the nurse's question for him, Sam's next thought had nothing to do with food. "Where's Lily?" The nurse responded with a puzzled expression. "Who?" Sam ignored the sting in his chest as he shuffled into a seated position. "Lily, my cousin." His gaze scanned left and right, moving between the beds and patients that shared the ward. All 7 beds were occupied. None of them contained Lily. The nurse dropped her own gaze to a clipboard at the foot of Sam's bed. As she read from it, she said, "I'm sorry, There's no mention of anyone else? Fear had wrapped its icy fingers around his heart. Its grip was tightening as he began to count the reasons why Lily might not be in the hospital with him. He could only think of one. Is she dead? His question had transformed the nurse's pretty face into an ugly scrunch of discomfort. As she backed away from his bed, Sam whispered his question again. Is Lily dead? The nurse was rescued by the loud slam of a door. The sound was quickly pursued by the clatter of hurried footsteps. Sam! A familiar voice panted. You awake? I should hope so, a second voice added. Lazy beggar's been sleeping for the best part of 2 days. Tom and Pamela hopped onto the foot of Sam's bed, perching together like a couple of cosy parrots. Their smiles and wide eyes told Sam that they were happy to see him. Sam found it impossible to return their warmth. She's dead, isn't she? What? The smile dropped from Tom's lips like melted ice. Pamela leaned back as she had just been slapped. Who? Lily, Sam said. The nurse had no idea who she was. Is she dead? After a moment of frozen silence, both faces broke into grins. Dead? Tom's face was contorted by mirth and sympathy. He nudged Pamela in the ribs. I guess that's a ghost in the next room then. Yup, Pamela giggled. A talking ghost. As a tsunami of relief hit him, Sam buried his head into his hands. He was fighting tears as he said, She's not dead. Of course she's not dead, Tom replied. She's next door, resting. Pamela wagged a finger towards Sam. Like you should be. Dragging the bedsheets away from his legs, Sam rolled to his left and dropped the soles of his bare feet onto the tiled floor. Cold gripped his skin. I've had enough rest. Come on, take me to her. The neighbouring ward was a mirror image of the room that the trio had just left. Sam pushed through the double doors at such a pace that the hem of his hospital gown flapped like a sail. His feet beat out a round of applause as he rushed into the room. A stern-looking matron looked up from her paperwork, glaring at the children over the top of her black spectacle frames. Be quiet. This isn't a playground. Ignoring her, Sam continued down the room. He checked the occupant for each bed. Part of him didn't believe what Tom and Pamela had told him. Part of him needed to see Lily for himself. He found her sleeping in the 5th bay. Tom joined Sam at the foot of Lily's bed. What did I tell you? Pamela squeezed beside him. She's a lot better, but the doctor says she'll be sound. Sam couldn't take his eyes from Lily. Her forehead was swathed in bandages, hiding burns that her hospital notes classified as superficial. More bandages protected scorched fingertips that would probably remain sore for several weeks. I did this, Sam muttered. This is my fault. What are you talking about? Tom added. I should have gone into the house, Sam replied. Then none of this would have happened. Rubbish, Pamela insisted. You're the reason she's still alive. It was you who found her. Sam was preparing to argue when his attention was stolen by the sharp rap of military-grade heels against floor tiles. Glad to see you up and about, Sam. When Sam turned, he found himself staring up at the reassuring face of Corporal Timmins. Unlike Sam and Lily, the soldier looked relatively unscathed. It's more than I can say for Lily, Sam told him. She's never going to forgive me, is she? Corporal Timmins studied Tom's and Pamela's faces, looking for answers. He thinks it's his fault that she got hurt, Tom explained. Reckons he shouldn't have been to Hero, Pamela added. Obviously thinks us females aren't capable of thinking or acting for ourselves. Suddenly understanding, Corporal Timmins smiled at Sam warmly, gently rubbing the boy's head before easing himself into a spare chair. She looks a little better, whispered the corporal. Pamela nodded. The doctors reckon she's making good progress. Smiling, the corporal looked across at Sam and said, That's good. It means she's over the worst. Sam didn't respond. The soldier paused, and then jerked as though he had just remembered something important. I almost forgot. The base commander wants to meet you both. I told him I'd ask you if it was okay. Why would the base commander want to meet me? Came a small croak from the hospital bed. The weak voice shocked them all, whipping their heads round as if they were each attached to chains. Lily! Sam gasped, leaping out of his chair. You're awake! His young cousin squirmed painfully in her hospital bed, struggling to prop herself up. "How can I sleep with you lot nattering away like washerwomen?" Grinning, Tom said, "She's definitely feeling better." Lily turned to gaze at her cousin. "I'm sorry, Sam." "You're sorry?" Lily nodded. "You told me not to go into the house. I should have listened." Sam shook his head. "I should have stopped you." "He's only jealous." Pamela leaned towards Lily and winked. "I think he wanted all its glory for himself." Lily laughed, then raised a hand to her throat and winced. "There's nothing heroic about getting burned." Suddenly, her eyes widened as she threw a bandaged hand to cover her mouth. "The book! Oh no! The school! Sam! What day is it?" Sam couldn't answer. "Thursday," offered Pamela. "But—" Corporal Timmins silenced Lily with a gentle wave of his hand. "That's why I'm here, Lily. I have some news." Sam reached for one of Lily's wrapped hands, holding it gently. He knew what was coming. "When I found you, you were already unconscious," the corporal told Lily. "The lodger's cigarette must have set his blanket on fire, and it went up like summer hay in a lightning storm. I've never seen a blaze like it." He paused, perhaps searching for the right words. "Let's just say, much longer, and we wouldn't be talking like this." Lily glanced at Sam, whose nod confirmed that the corporal's story was true. "It was Corporal Timmins who rescued you," Sam told her. "It was a joint effort, Lily," the soldier added. "Sam was very brave." Sam fixed his gaze on the hospital's tiled floor. He didn't feel very brave. After all, he had failed. "And when I got you, there was something in your hand." Sam looked up. Lily's eyes were filled with hope. "The book!" Corporal Timmins stiffened his back and his eyes hardened. A few of the pages were singed, but it was all in one piece. It told us everything. The lodger had been spying on the RAF base for weeks. "Why?" Lily gasped. "What kind of person would do that?" The corporal nodded. "His real name is Alberto, and it turns out his mother's family are Italian. I guess he had decided he'd rather side with them against the Allies. He'd been watching our movements for months and knew all about the extra company moving into the school. He had dates, times, numbers, everything." "Did he get away?" Lily asked. "Not a chance," Sam said. "The corporal's men ran him into the woods, right?" "Right. He's going nowhere." "What about Mrs. Scales? The boys?" The soldier shook his head. "We can't prove that they knew anything about it." Lily gasped. "You mean they'll just get to go home?" "Not necessarily," the corporal said. "We found evidence under the house of a stone cellar full of black market food. That usually means hard labour or a fine, at the very least, and we could try to charge them with harbouring a traitor. After that, it's up to the judge." Sam and Lily swapped satisfied smiles. "Tell them about the school," Pamela urged. The soldier sighed. "It took a direct hit. The main building was completely destroyed." There was a short silence. Tears rolled down Lily's cheeks and she raised her bandaged hands. "So, all this was for nothing?" "Not quite," Corporal Timmins shook his head. "Thanks to your hard work, we had a head start on the bombers. The book that you found brought us some valuable time." The corners of his mouth twitched towards a smile as he continued. "We couldn't stop the bombing raid, but we did have time to evacuate the school. Thanks to you lot, we were able to save over 200 men. Sam and Lily collapsed towards each other, falling into a hug that was tightened by a mix of relief and happiness. Corporal Timmins gave them all a reassuring wink. Who'd have thought that the combined might of Hitler's Navy and Luftwaffe could be outsmarted by 4 children? Chapter 21. Telegrams and train trips. Corporal Timmins had been gone less than 30 minutes. He'd managed to lure Tom and Pamela away with the promise of a free lift home, leaving Sam and Lily alone together. The nurses had barely finished changing the dressings on Lily's hands when the clatter of more footsteps rang out from the hospital corridor. "Sounds like someone's in a rat-orry," complained the oldest nurse. "I've heard marching bands make less racket." The noise grew louder as the footsteps switched from a walk to a run. Moments later, the doors to the ward crashed open, slamming against the walls and drawing startled yelps from several patients. Yet that noise was nothing compared to the cries and wails that followed, as two red-headed women thundered towards Lily's bed. Shock forced Sam out of his chair before the two arms that he had missed more than he'd realised wrapped around me in a hug which threatened him with suffocation. He saw Lily disappear into a similar embrace. "Mum!" he finally gasped. He squirmed as his cheeks were assaulted by dozens of soft kisses, and then winced as Joan Hunt gave her son a swift clip to the ear. "What were you thinking?" she shrieked as she pulled him towards her again and squeezed him tightly. He felt his face grow damp as his mother's kisses were joined by a stream of warm tears. Gently he eased himself free and gazed down into the eyes which blazed with love. "It's okay, Mum," he assured her. "We're fine." "Fine?" Aunt Peg howled, clasping a hand over each of her daughter's cheeks as she stared at her. "You called this fine? All those nights we dragged you to the shelter, and as soon as we send you away to where you're safe, you rush into the first burning building you see." "I'll be okay, Mum," Lily said. "It's not as bad as it looks." "Let me speak to the doctors about that," Aunt Peg insisted, before throwing her arms around her little girl again. Sam couldn't shake off his confusion. "But Mum, what are you doing here?" "That lovely Mrs. Ward sent us a telegram yesterday," she explained. "She told me all about what you two had been up to, and what happened to poor Lily." Aunt Peg looked across at Sam. "Scared us half to death, she did. I was sure it was bad news. Never do that again, do you hear?" Sam shuddered at the thought of his mother receiving a telegram. Since the troops had been deployed, a telegram at the door had only meant one thing: the death of a loved one. Now, he understood the two women's joy at finding their children alive and well. "We got the first train from London," his mother explained. "Soldiers were waiting for us at the station. They brought us straight here." "But why, how?" Sam's head was spinning with a scramble of thoughts and emotions. "Where will you stay?" It was then that Sam noticed that a third woman had joined them at Lily's bedside. Her smile was wide and warm, and her eyes as kind as those belonging to his mother and aunt. "They'll stay with us, Sam," Mrs. Ward said. She then looked gleefully across at Lily. "And so will Lily, when she's well enough. The billet officer had given me permission to let Lily live with us until it's safe for you to go home. The soldiers managed to salvage some of Lily's belongings from the burnt-out farmhouse. There wasn't much left, but I've washed and mended what they found, and transferred it to our spare room." As the bedside was lit with smiles and happiness, Mrs. Ward added, "It's the least I can do for our two life-saving heroes from London." Chapter 22. Tires as thick as licorice. 3 weeks passed before Sam's mother returned to London with Aunt Peg. By then, Lily had already been out of the hospital for a while, and her scars were well on the way to healing. Life felt as though it was returning to normal. Well, as normal as life can be during wartime. Lily quickly settled into the spare room at Mrs. Ward's house, having promised to look after the two children as if they were her own. Mrs. Ward pulled out all the stops to keep her word. In fact, she treated Lily like the daughter that she'd always wanted. It wasn't long before the two were inseparable. Mrs. Ward taught Lily to bake, they tended the small vegetable patch together, they hung out washing like a tag team, and even spent entire evenings plaiting each other's hair. Since the fire at Scales Farm, Sam had been fighting a daily battle with guilt. Lily's burns had healed, and her scars, once red and raw, were now already beginning to fade. The doctors had promised that they would vanish entirely within the year, yet Sam knew that his cousin had scars that no one could see. During those first few weeks at Mrs. Ward's, Sam had heard Lily cry out many times in her sleep as nightmares dragged her back into the blazing farmhouse. Deep down, he still believed that it was his fault. As she had settled in, though, her nighttime panics had begun to recede. Sam liked to think that Mrs. Ward's care and affection was working its magic. Sam loved seeing the two of them getting on so well. After the miserable time that his cousin had endured at Scales Farm, Sam was happy that Lily was finally beginning to enjoy living in Yorkshire. However, there were times when he felt a little left out, and so 3 months after the farmhouse fire, he paid a visit to Mr. Hargrave's grocery store. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Tom asked him. Both boys were stood on the pavement outside the shop's window. An icy chill had been blowing in from the North Sea for the past few days, but today it was biting at their skin particularly hard. Sam had to concentrate to stop his teeth from chattering. "It will give me something to do," Sam replied. "There's plenty to do already," Tom reminded him. "We've still got miles of beaches to explore, and there are loads of cliffs to climb. Hey, I forgot to tell you, Trudy Jones found a massive fossil in the caves at Flamborough yesterday." Sam gave his shoulders a weak shrug. "We won't be able to do any of those things when the weather turns. Mrs. Ward says the beach is no place to be when there's a gale blowing in. Filey's a summer town." Tom jabbed his thumb towards a small rectangle of card wedged into the inside frame of the grocery store's window. "So this is how you'll be spending your winter." Sam's eyes settled on the card they had first seen several days earlier. Although the grocer's advertising skills left a lot to be desired, his message had caught Sam's attention. When Sam didn't reply, Tom read from the card. Grocery boy wanted: pay bad, buy cold, work hard, boss grumpy, inquire within. After flapping his lips loudly, Tom asked, "Are you mad?" Everything about the handwritten advert should have sent Sam running a mile. After all, bad pay and hard work is never a great combination. His dad had always told him as much. But, as much as Sam was enjoying Filey's quiet life and the little town's tranquil charm, he was getting a little bored. He was missing the hustle of London's crowded streets. Sharing his home city with hundreds of thousands of other people had its drawbacks, but there was also an excitement and a buzz that came from such incredible variety. Although he didn't miss Hitler's bombs, he did sometimes yearn to be back in London. Tom gazed at the advert, shaking his head. "If you ask me, it sounds like it should come with a government warning. You won't catch me applying for that." They were disturbed by the familiar jangle of the grocery shop's hollow copper bell. Mr. Hargraves' puzzled frown greeted them at the door. "I hope you two scruffy oiks aren't going to stand there all day. You'll be scaring off my customers." "Oh, Sam shuffled from foot to foot. "Well, I mean..." The returned grocer looked shocked to see Sam. "Oh, hello, Sam. What brings the local celebrity to my door?" Sam blushed. It had been weeks since anyone had mentioned their spy catching heroics. Most people seemed to have forgotten. Tom stepped forward. "He's come about the delivery job." Tom tapped the glass in front of the card. "The one with the bad pay and grumpy boss?" Suddenly, Mr. Hargrave's frown turned into an eager smile. He stepped away from the door and beckoned the boys into his shop. As Sam followed Tom into the warmth of the store, Mr. Hargrave chuckled behind them. "Just wait till I tell t' wife. She said me ad would scare folk off, and now I've got 2 strapping lads applying." Before Tom had the chance to explain that he wasn't there to apply, Mr. Hargraves ushered them past his serving counter and into the shop's storeroom. "Just watch you don't bump yourselves on those boxes," he warned, guiding them between 2 stacks of wooden containers marked flour. "We've had new stock sent through, and I'm still in the process of unpacking it all. Now, about that job." "Just inquiring, really," Sam explained. "Can you tell me a bit more about it, please?" "What's to tell?" the grocer wondered. "Like my card says, it's rubbish pay, hard work, and I'm grumpy. That's about it, really." "How much?" Tom asked. Mr. Hargrave scratched his head for a second, then said, "Well, if you ask my wife, she'd tell you that I'm very grumpy." No, Tom sniggered. "I mean, how much is the pay?" "Oh, to be honest, it's mostly weekend work, and I can't give you much more than a shilling or 2, the shopkeeper admitted. "But you'll get more in tips." "Tips?" Sam asked. "Aye," Mr. Hargraves nodded. "Most of my customers are older folk, and not all of them have got any grandchildren." "What's that got to do with tips?" Tom asked. The grocer continued. "Those folk with no grandkids still get their full rations: eggs, flour, milk, meat, and sweets." He winked at them before explaining. "Those coupons can be used in my shop. So what tends to happen is they give me delivery lads their weekly ration of sweets as a tip. My last lad used to get over 10 rations each week." as Sam and Tom tried to calculate how many sweets that would add up to. Mr. Hargraves helped them out. Basically, you can have as many sweets as you like. We could sell them at school, Tom whispered to Sam. Pamela knows loads of kids. Sam turns to his friend. We? Ignoring Sam's question, Tom continued to quiz the grocer. Your ad mentions a bike. How old is it? Mr. Hargraves tried his best to hide a guilty expression behind the hand that massaged his chin. I knew you'd ask me about the bike. Now, bear with me for a moment, because I've got a bit of confession to make. The grocer disappeared through another door, leaving the two friends alone in his storeroom. Tom fired a knowing sneer in Sam's direction. Told you, didn't I? It's probably some kind of rusty death trap. Sam was still puzzled by his friend's earlier choice of words. You said we. I thought you were against this job. I am. Tom waved his friend's question away. But I'll still help you sell the sweets. We can split the profits. 50-50. 50-50, Sam spluttered. Are you having a laugh? Before Tom could reply, Mr. Hargrave returned to the store. When Sam and Tom saw what he'd brought with him, their jaws fell open like a couple of old coat pockets. I'm sorry. I should have amended my advert, Mr. Hargraves admitted. I've recently upgraded my company transportation. Sam and Tom both stared at the two gleaming red rally bicycles that Mr. Hargraves had just rolled into the room. The wheels and handlebars shone silver, and the tyres were so new and fat that they resembled thick rolls of licorice. I had these delivered the other day, Gross continued. They might be in a bit of the big side, and I'll be having baskets fitted to front. But I can have the seats and handlebars adjusted for you. The boys stood looking at the bikes, their eyes blazing with the lust and hunger of a lion eating fresh meat. Why have you got two? Sam eventually asked. Guilt creased the grocer's mouth again. My ad doesn't mention it, but we need 2 new delivery boys. 2 jobs, Sam repeated. Tom nudged his friend in the ribs. 2 bikes. Smiling broadly, the shopkeeper wheeled the brand new bikes towards the 2 boys. So, have I got myself 2 new delivery lads? Sam's reply was a kind of smile that his lips hadn't given for as long as he could remember. As his fingers embraced the unblemished handlebars of his brand new bike, he realised that life as an evacuee definitely had its perks. And that's the end of the story. Hope you enjoyed listening to it.